Well, good morning, YouTube. This is Chuck, and we just got done walking our morning walk around the lake, and no Flapjack there. He's kind of puffing. He'd like to have a drink of water, but figured I'd stop and see if I can make a video here first and talk to you a little bit about our recap of our trip up there, because I missed a little bit on some stuff. I made a video up there, but I didn't like it. So I'm trying to do a little bit of a recap on some of the stuff that we ran into up there. So it's a pretty morning here. The temperature's nice. It's Sunday, August 8th. So anyway, we didn't have the level of activity. As I told you on a different video, we did a split camp this time, and Kevin and Chris were over in one spot, over by a place we call Campo Bonito, and we were over at Hilltop 91, and they're fairly close together. There's no road between them, so it takes you got to kind of make a loop around to get to them from one to the other. But we tried the split camp thing, and they had a higher level of activity over at their place than we did at our place, and that's not unusual, because for some reason or other Kevin seems to draw that activity more than the rest of us do. But Paul and I, we sat out 2 nights, and we had a bit of activity. Had the cloaked ones come in on us, and Paul hasn't quite got his eyes trained, I think, to see those, and so he was having trouble seeing what I was seeing. But it takes, like anything else, it takes training. I guess the big takeaways on this particular trip was that road that goes right by Hilltop 91, and Hilltop 91 is real close to the road, and that is actually a major access point to some backcountry. It's on a big loop, and but the road's been so bad it doesn't get a lot of doesn't get a lot of traffic. Well, after about 20 years of letting it be, the Forest Service hired a contractor to go in there and fix it, and so they did, and they corrected a bunch of drainage problems, and they took care of a bunch of bumpy sections. But one of the things that they ended up doing is they ended up making the thing dusty. And that dust is like a real fine talcum powder dust. And oh, it's horrible. It gets into everything. And we were there in the middle of the week, so normally we wouldn't get a whole lot of traffic by there. But a couple miles to the north of us, the Forest Service had a little 8-acre fire that they were dealing with. And we talked to one of the units when they come by, and they told us about it. And it was basically contained, but they had units on it, and they had a water truck hauling water back and forth, shuttling water to the units on the fire. And boy, that guy'd kick up a lot of dust every time he'd go by. And the wind was a little bit variable, so if it blew the dust across the road the other direction, it wasn't too bad. But there was a few times it blew it our direction, and we had to literally sit there and hold our breath. And so Kevin and Chris came over both days and told us about what they were experiencing over at their place. And of course that made us jealous, and we weren't quite getting the level of stuff. But one thing that did happen that was kind of interesting is on Wednesday morning, Kevin was over there and he's talking to me, and all of a sudden he told me to turn around and look behind him, and we saw a mountain lion. Kevin got a pretty good look at it. By the time I got turned around, all I saw was part of its back. Definitely saw something. Definitely the hair and the way it walked, it definitely was not a coyote. And I couldn't absolutely identify that it was a cat, but Kevin said he got a pretty good look at it. And later on that same evening, looking off the other direction, Paul got a pretty good look at it. I didn't see it at all that time. So apparently circled our camp in the morning, and then circled our camp the other direction and coming back in the evening. And a year ago we were there, and we got a real good look at a pretty good sized lion, and this one the guy said it was a pretty good sized one as well, and so it's probably the same one. But then over on Thursday over at the Kevin and Chris's camp, they saw it twice. And so that was 5 lion sightings in 3 days, and that's not normal. Lions normally don't hang around camps that way, so that's a little bit disconcerting. It makes me glad that I'm sleeping inside a van instead of in a tent. But we sit outside in the dark, and anything could walk right up to us, and we didn't have any issues, but it's a little bit concerning. But I guess the biggest thing that we had was Thursday night. Of course, we left and came home Friday morning, but Thursday night, about right about 10 o'clock, Paul and I were getting ready to call it a night, and I saw off across the way, I saw a dark mass move right to left, and it was pretty good size, moving pretty, not real stunningly fast, but moving quickly, and couldn't absolutely identify what it was, but it was big enough. There's not a whole lot of choices. So anyway, I decided to set out a little bit longer, and so a little bit later, I see it move the other direction, and that time it moved left to right in roughly the same spot. And I got a little bit better look at it that time, but I still absolutely couldn't say what it was. But what I will tell you, it was big enough, and the way it moved, there's a whole lot of things it couldn't have been. It was too big to be an elk or something like that, and it was moving too fast to be a bear, and it was way too big to be a bear. And so I got up and I kind of walked over that direction, and I got a pretty good zap. So that kind of tells me that it was one of them, and they were kind of circling our camp, and I saw it, but I couldn't. There's no way I could put my hand up in a court of law and swear that that's what it was. But it was a pretty big, pretty good sized dark mass, and it was pretty dark out. The moon was just in the process of coming up, but that was pretty much all we got. Now, like I say, it was low level activity. I know what I was seeing. At one point I had one standing right next to me, and between me and the van, and that's always good because that way you can see the distortion up against the bushes. You can't always see it, but when it's up against something solid like the paint lines on the van, then you can see it. And even Paul saw that one, and it was pretty good size. I'd say 8 foot or better. I couldn't really tell how far away it was from me, but he was pretty big one. I tried talking to him, and he wouldn't talk to me. I didn't get a whole lot of mind speak. One interesting thing that did happen, and I don't think I talked about it in another video, is on the first night, that would have been Wednesday night when Paul and I were sitting out, I asked how many of them were around us because I could sense that they were there. And I got a number, but I asked Paul, I said, what's the first number that popped into your head? And the number he was given was 7, which was the same number that I got. So he's been wanting to receive mind speak, and he did, but he's still not quite recognizing it for what it is. It was just a random number. I told him to put his mind in neutral and pick whatever number popped into his head, and that was the number he picked. And we both picked the same number, so I think that was probably accurate. So it wasn't as total. We didn't get skunked by any means, but we didn't get the level of activity that they got over at the other camp. And you can go over to Kevin's channel, Arizona Squatch, and they talk about that. And they had a big one by the name of Relk, who's an elder. We've had contact with him before, and he actually showed himself to them. And they say he's very, very large, but he doesn't have the big massive build. He's kind of a lighter color. They think it was gray. It was after dark, so they couldn't tell whether it was tan or gray, but they think it was gray. And they estimate that he had a thin build, but they estimate that he was probably in the 12-foot range. And that's a big boy. Well, on one of my other videos, you heard me talk about Eadengan, and it's not to be confused with Eadengen, who was his mate. But Eadengan passed away in 2020 at the age of 225, and they notified us about that, and we talk about that in another video as well. But so he would be 228, and we were told that Relk is his older brother. So Relk is obviously over 228, so let's just guess 230. So he's an old boy and he's a big boy, and he actually showed himself to the other guys. And you can go over on Kevin's Arizona Squash channel, and they talk about what they saw that night. I didn't experience it. It's their story to tell, but obviously they were pretty excited. And they said Chris saw one across the meadow, and Kevin got up to walk over someplace and had one kind of run away from him. So they had some pretty good sightings. I personally I've had 6 solid nighttime sightings. It took me 6 years to have my first one. I have never seen one in daylight. I would definitely like to see one in daylight. I can't tell you what color any of them were. I can tell you that The smallest one I saw was probably, 4.5, 5 foot tall, something like that. And the tallest one was a pretty good sized guy. I think he was probably in the 9 or 10 foot range. And that was over at Crazy Town. So that's kind of a recap of my trip. And I'll let you go for now. And as I always tell you, take care of each other and love each other. And we'll get back to you on another one here pretty quick. So it's a pretty morning over here at the park. Glad to be back home, but I sure yearn for being up on the mountains. That was a really nice trip. So I'll give you a shot of the rocks and the trees and the greenery over there, and I'll just tell you until next time, peace out.